I think we can get started. A few other folks are coming in, but that's okay. I'm just going to do a couple quick introductions and get the show rolling. So thanks, everybody, for coming. My name's Amy Sullenberg, and I'm the Executive Director of Climate Smart Missoula. And we decided to put this workshop on in collaboration with the City of Missoula, the Missoula Federal Credit Union, Montana Renewable Energy Association. That's the main ones, right? Did I miss anybody? Yeah. And then we're going to talk a little bit about SoulSmart, which is the entity that helped to fund putting on some workshops like this and a whole bunch of other efforts that are happening. And Andrew will speak to that. So the basic gist of this next hour is us taking turns sharing some expertise around solar, targeted at the residential level. And We'll just share what we know and trying to make solar easy, which is solar ease. Folks may have heard, how many folks were aware of or participated in the Solar Eyes project that a handful of us put on 2 years ago? Just a couple, okay. We actually have some solar installers, and a few of them are here, and at the end, you know, we can meet those folks too. But we did have a program called Solar Eyes where we did a workshop very similar to this, and then we had people sign up, and we had solar installers that were sort of pre-identified and ready to go. We had a set price, and it was very much an established program. If you signed up, we set you up with an installer, and you knew kind of what you were getting into and how much it might cost. It was a fairly elaborate program, and for a bunch of reasons I don't need to talk about tonight, we decided we weren't going to do that particular formal program, but more get the word out about how to get solar. We'll tell you everything you need to know, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. And then again, there are some installers here, and we can point you to maybe some other folks who do the kind of service that you may need, most likely you'd need in order to get solar at your home or even your business. So that's the idea tonight, and then afterwards, yeah, we'd love to know, is this valuable? Did you get what you needed to know? I think a lot of people, as they came in, they got that little quarter pager, which just basically has some links on it. So after this, you can follow up and go to that links. We'll have the whole slideshow up on our website, and then we have Scott back here from MCAT, and they are taping this program. So as soon as we get an idea of where that is on MCAT, we'll also link that URL and let you guys know when that will be shown. So that's, again, why we had folks sign in so we can do a bit of that follow-up. So I think just a couple other things. The food, we have just some snacks here. If you get up and you're hungry, feel free to wander to the back. That was provided by Missoula Federal Credit Union with help from Climate Smart getting it together. If anybody needs to sneak out, the restrooms are right through there and to the left. I think that's all. Anything we need to know just to get started? Okay. Again, thanks for coming, and I think we're just going to roll through this. The first person that we're going to hear from is Andrew Valanis with Montana Renewable Energy Association, and then we'll just cycle through. Basically, the gist is we're going to give you a bit of an introduction. We're going to talk really about how this works to get solar on your house, and then we're going to talk about some of the financing pieces that you'll need to know. So I'm going to step it through that way. All right.
Can you all hear me? Do I need to use the microphone?
Scott's saying yes because of MCAT.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, great. No worries. I will. And as far as, yeah, that'd be great. Excellent. So my name is Andrew Valanis. I am the executive director of the, nope, that's not going to work. I'm the executive director of the Montana Renewable Energy Association. Thank you all for coming. Would you pop to the next slide for me. Just really quickly about MREA and what we do. MREA has 3 focus areas. We're a membership-based organization based here in Missoula. We work statewide, and we work on education and outreach efforts, programs like this. We work on policy and advocacy work, which I'll touch on in a minute, and we also do a lot of industry engagement, which is one of the things that makes us unique. So there are a lot of great advocacy organizations in the state that do good work on renewable energy issues, and we are one of the ones that actually works very closely with actual renewable energy installers and kind of provide their voice and try to work with them as much as we can to help their needs when and however we can. So SoulSmart is a program, it's a national program, it's funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, and this program is really designed, well, it's part of the reason we're here today. So this program is designed to help lower the costs of solar, but not the hard costs of solar, things like the modules and the inverters and the panels, but the soft costs of solar. So what are soft costs with going solar? Soft costs are things like your permitting fees, overhead from administration of zoning and planning departments. Soft costs are things like labor as well. And this program tries to address some of those, not things like labor, but some of those things by working with communities and streamlining the process of going solar. So my organization, MREA, received a grant contract from the SolSmart program to work with communities around Montana to try and make their process of going solar easier. And Missoula was one of the ones on that list. We're also working with Missoula County, and we're trying to get them designated as a SolSmart community. And what that would mean is a designation, a bronze, a silver, or a gold is kind of like a LEED certification, if you've ever heard of the LEED program for a building, right? There are milestones that you work through, there's criteria you try and accomplish. Again, things like working on your permitting processes. Does your community have a landing page for solar that people can go to and learn the process for going solar, like we're going to talk about tonight? Can they learn where to get in touch with local installers? Can they learn what permits they need and kind of what zoning restrictions there are? So how do we help that information? And again, it's all about just making the process of going solar as easy as possible. City of Missoula, Chase Jones back there, our energy conservation coordinator, is working on SolSmart designation, and I won't ruin the surprise, but we are pretty confident about the designation we're going to get. And a number of the things that I mentioned we are working on. So Missoula has a robust renewable energy industry compared to other communities in Montana especially, and the process here is pretty straightforward, but we're working on making that process even more streamlined. Could you go to the next slide? So the SolSmart program's goal is to have more than 300 communities across the U.S. designated by either bronze, silver, or gold. And if you can notice, there's a little bit of a blank space up there right around Montana and the Dakotas. But my goal within the next 4 months is actually to have 5 little dots up there. And I'm hoping that a number of them will be silver and maybe even gold and not just bronze. And we're thinking that that's pretty likely. So organizing community events like this is part of that program. Community education and outreach is part of that program. So we're grateful to have this opportunity to work on a great program like this. So my other job tonight is to talk to you a little bit about the solar landscape in Montana. And I want to talk to you about kind of the size of systems we're seeing around the state. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on with some policy and tax incentives, and then I'll pass it along to Brian. First and foremost, historically since about 2000, when we really started seeing a lot of rooftop solar enter the market, I mean, there was rooftop solar plenty before that as well, but we've really started tracking data since about 2000 when the net metering policy kicked in 1999. And we've seen about 8.5 megawatts of solar since the year 2000. Now, for reference, your small rooftop system is going to be somewhere around 3, 5, 7, maybe 9, 10 kilowatts. Okay, that's a kilowatt. So 8.5 megawatts since 2000. It's kind of grown over the past decade or so as technology has advanced and as going solar has become more and more popular, as the industry in Montana has grown and is doing more great work. We're starting to see shared solar now from some of our cooperatives. We'll talk about shared solar in a minute. These are kind of your medium range installations, things like 50 kilowatts, 70 kilowatts, 100 kilowatts. But what's really exciting and what's so important about this year as kind of a landmark for Montana's solar industry is we're seeing utility scale solar enter the state. So we had 6 utility scale projects enter the state in 2017. 5 of them were 3 megawatts. And 1 of them was 2 megawatts. So we added 17 megawatts of solar capacity in 2017 alone, compared to the 8.5 megawatts that we had in just the rooftop kind of sector. So we tripled our solar capacity in a single year, which is great. And it's most important because Montana is starting to be identified as it should as a great place to go solar. Solar still makes up just a fraction of our total electricity supply in the state, but there was an NREL report recently released in the last couple of years that showed that rooftop solar alone could produce up to 28% of Montana's solar needs. Electricity needs through solar. So there's a lot of potential for growth. That's part of the reason I'm excited to see so many people here tonight, because we hope that you will all go solar and help us get even closer to reaching that goal. Let's talk about net metering for a second. And net metering has been talked about for years and years. Has anybody followed net metering and what's going on at the Montana legislature? Raise your hands if you have been. Paul has been, I'm sure. Chase certainly has been. Great. Okay, well, let's talk about net metering for a second. So, and I think Brian's going to touch on this in a little bit as well, but here's kind of the gist. Net metering and why it's important to rooftop systems is because if you have your own renewable energy generating system, a rooftop solar or small scale wind, and you are generating more energy than you are consuming on site, that energy is allowed to go back onto the grid. And when it goes onto the grid, it's getting used by other grid customers. You receive, through a net metering policy, through a net metering setup, you receive an on-bill credit for the energy that you are giving back to the grid. That's effectively what net metering is. So, for example, a rooftop system on a hot summer day when you're off at work and your home is getting tons of sunlight, you are producing a whole lot of electricity, but because you're not home using any of your electronics, you're not consuming a lot of electricity. And so you can push a lot of that electricity back onto the grid where it can be used, and then you can get credits for that energy. If you have solar, like I said, want to have solar or generally support solar, you should be watching the net metering debate very closely. Net metering has been something that's come under attack over the past several years in a number of different ways. Utilities have opposed it, certain legislators have opposed it, typically anybody who is anti-renewable energy has opposed it. It's a really important policy because it's a very fair policy, right? You're providing services to the grid, you're providing services to other energy customers, and there should be some kind of benefit to you providing that energy back onto the grid. Right now there is a cap for the size of system that you can install under net metering. The cap is 50 kilowatts. For most of your rooftop systems that I imagine most of you are interested in, that's probably not going to affect your decision that much. But one of the key aspects is the rate at which you get credited when you're providing that excess energy back onto the grid. Right now, the Public Service Commission is overseeing a cost-benefit analysis of net metering in Montana, which is being conducted, the analysis is being conducted by Northwestern Energy. And the reason this is significant is because the results of that analysis could change the compensation rate that you get for your on-bill credits, and that significantly affects the finances of your net metered system. So I'm very happy to talk until I'm blue in the face about net metering policy, but I don't want that to take up all of tonight. So if you have any questions, please find me afterwards. There is a shameless plug right on that slide that if you want to learn about the net metering debate and what's going on with it, check out the MREA policy page. We are one of the leading voices for net metering policy in the state and have been following it very closely. Continue to follow it even as of an hour ago when the legislature decided to potentially repeal tax incentives supporting net metering systems. So other things I'm happy to talk to you until I'm blue in the face about, but I think I need to talk to a few legislators about it first, so maybe give me a day. Oh, I was going to say, I thought I did that one already. Speaking of tax credits and incentives, so there are two tax credits and incentives that I want to make you aware of. And Paul, I forget if actually Paul is already going over these. Okay, great. So I can breeze through these then pretty quickly. But there is information on these. I'm glad to hear Paul's going to talk more about them. The Alternative Energy Systems Credit is the one that came under attack just today, and we're working to defend that attack. So I'll just leave it at that for that slide. Oh, well, yeah, I'll get into it for a second then. Great. So, you know, when you install a renewable energy system, there are kind of two main incentives that we see most Montanans use. One is a federal incentive and the other is a state incentive. The federal incentive is called the income tax credit. For short, we call it the ITC. So when you talk about incentives and you hear the phrase ITC, this is normally what we're talking about. And it's a credit where you can get up to 30% of your total installed cost on your taxes credited in the following year. And there's no maximum on the dollar amount that you can get, which is pretty significant. A lot of people use this tax incentive. The issue that we're running into right now is that the federal government has decided to sunset this incentive. It will sunset for residential and for commercial systems. It's going to step down over the next several years. You can see the table there, and I actually put the wrong number in there for residential. The issue with residential is that in 2022, that should actually say 0%, that's my fault. That actually drops to 0%, and so it will zero out as of the end of 2021. So if you're thinking of going solar, now's the time to do it. There's still some great incentives available, and you should definitely go after those. The commercial incentive will continue to exist, but we'll get down to about a 10% level in perpetuity. So if your business is considering going solar, you could still get that tax credit. And then the other one we're seeing is the Alternative Energy Systems Tax Credit. This is the one that I just mentioned is coming under attack right now. It's come under attack before. There was actually a bill this past legislative session that tried to repeal it, and MREA and our coalition partners were able to successfully get that vetoed, which was great. Thank you, Governor Bullock. This one you can get up to $500 per taxpayer and up to $1,000 per household. So there is a maximum, but between the 30% credit and the $1,000 credit, you can really get a significant portion of the cost of your solar covered through these incentives. So they are really important to know about. The federal one and the Alternative Energy Systems credit, I highly recommend, obviously, talk to the installer that you're working with. They know a lot about these credits and can put you in touch with the right people. But the Montana Department of Environmental Quality is another one who knows a lot about these incentives, specifically the Montana credit. They're one of the ones that works on that. So they're a good person to talk to. And I want to talk about shared solar really quick, just kind of briefly mention it as far as options go for those of us in the Missoula area. Really quickly, is anybody here, who here is a Northwestern Energy customer? Raise your hand. Okay, so most of us. Is anybody here a Flathead Electric customer? Or anybody here from the Bitterroot, other surrounding areas? Any co-op customers here? Okay, great. Are you guys Ravalli Electric? Nice. Okay, so you guys actually have community solar options, shared solar options, which is great. For those who don't know, shared solar is a way where customers who can't put renewable systems on their actual site, so on their roof, or even a small wind system at their home, can buy into a portion of a larger array. So there's this photo down here that shows a larger solar array, and there are kind of 3 different entities you can see buying in or buying a portion of these arrays. And what the setup is supposed to pretty much simulate having a rooftop system on your home, but the rooftop system just isn't on your rooftop. So imagine a large array, something like, you know, a few hundred panels out in a field, and it's producing electricity. It's owned and managed by a rural electric co-op, or hopefully one day Northwestern Energy as well. And it's owned by an energy provider, and you can buy a portion of that array and get the credit from that production onto your bill. So again, just like we talked about with rooftop solar and net metering, how you get the credits onto your bill, it's that same exact setup, except the solar array is just located somewhere else. Montana statute right now restricts Northwestern from being able to do it. That's why I said hopefully someday Northwestern can do it. We're working on trying to promote that legislation. But the co-ops, because they're not under the PSC's supervision, they can do shared solar and have done shared solar. Valley Electric has done it. Missoula Electric Co-op has done it. And we're starting to see more and more co-ops do it, which is really exciting to see. And if you have any questions about those, again, I'm happy to talk to you more about that. But I think that's it for me, and I'd love to pass it on to Brian to talk to you more about how you personally can go solar here in Missoula. Thanks.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks Andrew. My name's Brian von Lossberg. Some of you may know me. I'm on City Council in Missoula, proudly representing Ward 1. But my involvement with solar and this, Amy mentioned the Solarize program we did a couple years ago, and I was the campaign manager for that program. We worked with 4 different installers, had a lot of interest in the program, got about 50 systems, I think, around the community installed, and it was really fun to lead that program. And before that, I used to be involved. Some of you raise your hand if you know the Alternative Energy Resource Organization, AERO. Oh, good. AERO's been a partner and ally with MREA, and I was on the board and the executive director there for a couple years, and AERO has always been a strong advocate for renewable energy and sustainable ag work, and that's really where I got interested. So go ahead and click. So I'm going to kind of bring it down. Whoa, that is blinding light. A little more personal level and home focused. Out of curiosity, has anyone here worked with an installer to come out and have them do a site assessment on their home? You're one? A couple? Okay, good. But interest in the room is strong for working with an installer to come out. Yes, I see nodding. Oh, great, fantastic. So I like to put this slide up because there's really sort of 2 things at play when people are going solar. And the thing, I'm an engineering major, and so I can say this about engineers, but we tend to overemphasize the technical aspect, I feel, and the financial aspect of it. So obviously, it's a large financial investment to do solar on your home. There are all kinds of benefits to doing that. Paul from the credit union is going to go through a much more detailed analysis of that. That's one consideration. But interestingly, when I was at Arrow, one of the things we used to do was these renewable energy tours around the state. We'd go into different communities and we'd gather groups of people and go to someone's home, and they'd show off their system. They'd tell us what size it was, how much they invested in it. But when we would get back to their backyard and sit around and have a beer and get past the sort of formal part, I always like to ask people, you know, what was the main reason of why you put solar on your home? And almost always it was some variation of, because it represents my values, or somehow it's connected to my values, or things I believe in. Go ahead and click. And so there's all sorts of things touching around that values, and I just like to put this up there to recognize that that's an important thing to do. It's not all about the dollars and cents, and certainly we're going to go through some numbers that illustrate why it's gotten to be a better and better investment, but it's okay to do things that represent your values as well. And then the last slide, I think from Solarized to here, I cut back on a lot of the shameless pictures of my wife and daughter, but there's going to be a few of them. So that's my wife, Genevieve. That is she was 3, I guess, at the time. She's now 5.5. And we ran over and took some pictures in front of my friend's house over in the west side of a solar installation that I believe one of the installers in the room, Dan Brandberg, did. So it's also just the gratuitous picture of family. Andrew did a great job covering net metering. I'm not going to go through that in any detail again, other than dumb it down to say net metering is where you see the meter spin backwards, if you will. Now things are mostly digital, so you don't really actually see dials spinning backward. But if you've sort of heard of that, and the whole idea of energy that is coming into your house versus energy that's going back out, I think there actually used to be dial systems where the dial would actually run backward. But you see the same sort of thing in the digital array. And another way to think of it is the grid is basically serving like a big battery system for your home. My family has a cabin out near Helmville. We have a solar system on a pole array. It's not on the roof. And we've got batteries. We're not hooked into the grid there. And because we're not hooked into the grid, that's why we use a battery system. But if you're residential and you're connected to a utility, essentially that utility serves as your battery system. So you can go ahead, next one. Again, shameless picture of my wife and daughter. Just a little bit more detail about these panels. A solar panel is typically, for residential installations, about almost 5.5 feet by 3 feet 3 inches. So there you see 10 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, 10 of them up there. It's about 11 feet high by 16 feet wide. Gives you a sense of sort of scale. A typical panel, one of those 10 panels, produces on average 265 watts, but you'll see everything from low 200s, although I haven't seen anything on the low end, especially with the installers here, up to even above 300 watts. And so just some back of the envelope sort of math, a system like this, I don't think these were 265 watt panels, but if they were 10 panels, 265 watts, that's 2,650 watts, and you'll hear a lot about KW systems. Andrew talked about a typical home installation maybe being a 3 kW system, a 5 kW system, a 7. I think he even said 9 or 10, which, you know, it wasn't too long ago that seemed like a gigantic system, but that's certainly, those exist today. So this would be about a 2.7, 2.65 kilowatt or KW system. This is just a few pictures of some different installations. You know, these systems are prevalent enough now that you drive around the community. I think everybody, I'm sure, in the room has seen a system installed. And I really just threw in this one in the lower left with a little bit of frost on it is the one actually up at our cabin that I was mentioning. And so there are around town and in more rural settings pole-mounted systems. And in this particular case, in fact, Janelle with Jordan Solar installed this system for us. And I changed the tilt. And in the cases on installations on the homes, they're at a fixed angle. In this particular case on a pole, I change every month. I go out there and change the angle to optimize the energy that we get from the system. But those are just some typical installations. Workshops, garages, main homes, etc. So this is my favorite title, The Ecstasy of Information. So this is to add a little humor. I would imagine that some of you out there are sort of like me and my friend Matt. So the home I showed you with my wife and daughter with the 10 panels, Matt was so excited when he got his system that I started getting the stream of text messages from him, and I guarantee you that some of you out there, when you get your system, will do this as well. So he's texting me pictures of his meter telling me how many kilowatt hours it had produced net for the day and total for the day, and I actually was interested in hearing this kind of news, which says something about our friendship. Go ahead. Next one. So he loved the graphing ability to see, kilowatt hour production and over the course of the day, the total energy production. He even had a little weather symbol. You can click twice again. This one I really like. It shows the individual panels of the system and how each individual panel is doing. And hopefully you can read, he says, sorry, you must be sick of me nerding out over this, but I can see what each individual panel is producing. And lastly, he was really excited when he got to a point, and I circled that one in May of 2015, where he had 0 net usage for the month. So I would definitely be the type of person to text these kind of things, and I guarantee there'll be those of you as well. So how do you go about doing this if you're an interested homeowner? I stole a slide from Amy's organization, Climate Smart, because it's incredibly simple, right? It actually is very useful to go through. You can find the diagram on the left on their website, and it's full of good information. On the side is sort of the simple path, and it really, solar is a big investment. It can be a daunting sort of process for people, but really, you start out by going to a workshop like this. There's tons of information online that's really good. Amy's site has a great information. MREA's site has great information. Contact a local installer. 3 of the 4, I believe, that were in the Solarize program are in the audience today. I see Mike with Big Sky. I mentioned Dan and Becky from SBS. Janelle from Jordan Solar are here. Basically, the standard in the industry is you contact an installer, and they will come out to your house and do a free assessment of your property. And that's, I said, get a free site assessment. And what they're really doing is 2 main things. The first is a physical assessment of your property, where something might be installed. Would it be on a roof? Would it be on a detached garage? What direction do your roof faces face? South is ideal, but you're not out of the running if you have faces that face other directions. And then they're also going to ask you for a copy of your energy bill, and they're going to take a look at the energy usage profile that you have and work on those 2 things together. They're also going to use something called a solar pathfinder to see how the sun traverses and what sort of shading issues you have on your property. And then you're going to look at how big of a system, where might it be installed, and how much of your total energy use are you going to be able to offset. And that's where you start getting some decisions where you might be able to do everything, you might want to do 50%, and you might be limited on one side or the other. And then really it's a matter of reviewing the cost of the system based on how big a system you want to do. And financing options, I won't go into that. Paul's going to go over, but there are some great options here locally and in the state to do that. Sign a contract and you're off. Couple of things I thought I'd mention from the Solarize program that we did. If you get to that point where you're working with an installer, we went through the process when we picked those 4 installers to participate in the Solarize program of essentially vetting them for you. And these are some of the things we were looking at. Northwestern Energy maintains a listing of qualified solar PV installers. Ask them about their experience. All the ones I mentioned have a great deal of local experience. We use the California SB1 eligible equipment list. I wouldn't say that's something you have to get familiar with, but talk to your installer about the equipment that they use, licenses, insurance, typical questions. These systems often have significant warranties. These systems will last in excess of 30 years, often quite longer. Talk to them about those things and do reference check. All of these installers I've mentioned have done tons of systems in the area. We called people before they participated in the Solarize program, and it's a great way to get comfortable with someone you're going to work with. And I think this is about where I'm going to wrap up. Couple slides on pricing trends. So on the left, may be difficult to see, but back in 2000, on the left, the graph goes from 2010 through 2014, and then I've got current information, 2016 and 2017 on the right. The general thing to understand is that back in 2010, the metric that we use to track the cost of solar for residential installation is dollars per watt, per installed watt for the system. And so what you're seeing over on the left is 2010, somewhere above $6.50 on average dollars per watt installed. And you can see that the trend is obvious, and in 2014, upper 380, 385 sort of range. And that was when we launched the Solarize program, was I think 2015. So I looked at the most updated information, and you can see on the right there from the same source, SEIA, Q1 of 2016 and then Q1 of 2017, and you see a little bit above $3 and actually a little bit below $3 a watt for an installed system. And so that gives you kind of a baseline, and I know the familiarity I have with systems being installed, we're seeing that here in Montana. So we're seeing prices down below $3 a watt. Go ahead. And this is just that same sort of data. Again, $3.16 was the national average in this survey. And it's showing you a whole bunch of states. Montana's not on there, unfortunately, but I can tell you Montana actually tracks well with the same sort of data. And this range, I think in the notes it talked about all of these states were within sort of 40 cents of that mean. But again, confirming that $3 and sub $3 a watt installation cost. So solar has come down. Again, I said 2010 we were high 6, and we're down to 3 and below today, which I think is a good lead-in, hopefully, to financing options and assessing your investment. So thanks.
Hello. Amy, I'm going to see if I actually can't turn this around and try and drive myself. Thank you. And do everyone feel free to let me know if my levels go a little bit off here with the mic. I might get a little excited talking about this. I will. I'm Paul Herendeen. I'm the Director of Impact Market Development at the Missoula Federal Credit Union. And that is to say that I work to develop our social impact lending programs. One of those that I was working on was renewable energy and energy efficiency. And this is a question that I sort of felt like I should have a good answer to, right? I work at a credit union, I'm the solar guy, I should have an answer to this. But I found that as I started to come up with a good way to address this question, I was actually having kind of a hard time. And prior to working at the credit union, I was essentially an academic. And for academics, problems you don't quite understand are essentially monkey traps, right? You put your hand in the jar and you grab the peanuts, and you can't get your hand out. And so that's what happened to me. So next thing I knew, I'd read everything I could find on this question. I'd built some spreadsheets. I'd put a lot of time into it. And I think I basically got comfortable with the answer. And at that point, I figured I've done all this work. I might as well just write this up. So I did that. I wrote this into a report. And we are just publishing this today. And there are copies, paper copies in the back there. This is a preliminary report. We're going to publish this online in about a week. So before then, I'm really happy to take any feedback from folks on this, and all my contact information is in there. And the other reason I mention this is that once I get going, I'm going to cover quite a bit of ground, and I'm going to try and do it pretty quick. And a lot of the details you'll find in this report. Likewise, when I wrote this, I tried to make it pretty approachable, but I also wanted it to be thorough. So if you're the kind of person who likes seeing all the Greek, that's in the back if you want to get the full details. There's pretty good endnotes in it. So what is it that makes answering this question kind of difficult? One of the things is that there are a lot of details and there are a lot of assumptions, right? These systems last a very long time. We're talking about predicting performance 25 years into the future. Predicting any kind of financial performance that far into the future becomes very dependent on the assumptions you're going to make. So there's a lot of little knobs you can turn. As an example, a major one is what's going to happen to electricity prices. This is 25 years of data for electricity prices in Montana, and they've grown at a very consistent rate. This is nominal dollars. If you adjust this for inflation, it's almost flat. But is that going to continue for the next 25 years? Who knows? I don't. And this is particularly relevant, I think, in the context of a rapidly increasing global energy demand and also in terms of the very sharp cuts we're going to need to make in greenhouse gas emissions if we're going to hit international temperature targets. So what you think is going to happen to electricity prices ends up having a huge impact on how you calculate the financial performance of your system. The other thing that really makes this complicated is it turns out that there's really no one metric to assess the financial performance of a solar system. This graphic on the right is from a National Renewable Energy Lab paper that finally kind of clarified this for me. Unfortunately, it's full of stuff like this. There's pages and pages of it. And I read all that so you don't have to, and tried to distill it. And really, the answer I came up with is there is no one metric, right? There's just a lot of different questions you might find yourself asking about the financial performance of solar. Questions like, is this a good investment? What's the payback? When is this system going to pay for itself? Should I buy now or should I wait for prices to come down? Things like that. So as we go through here, I'm just going to take a couple of these questions and try and give you an answer for them. And to do that, I'm going to illustrate that with numbers from a hypothetical, what I call base case. This is a 5 kilowatt system, which would offset probably 50 or 60% of the use of a typical house. It's about the size of what you see on the roof there. An installed price of $3 per watt, and production of about 1,200 kilowatt hours per kilowatt of installed capacity per year. The other thing I'll mention about this is I assumed that this system was on Northwestern. The co-ops have slightly different rate structures that actually have a pretty big impact on the performance. So I chose Northwestern because that's probably the most common utility for folks in this room. So the first and pretty basic question, I think, is solar a good investment? That's one way to think about this, right? You're just going to purchase this as an investment, just like buying a treasury, just like buying into a mutual fund, any other investment you might make. So to compare solar, I put that up against a 20-year treasury bond and the last 25 years of a total stock market index fund. The reason there's those little colored bars at the top there is just to make the point that the return you get on a solar system is actually after tax, right? Because you're avoiding having to purchase electricity with your after-tax dollars. So when you're comparing that to another investment, you need to adjust for the effective taxes, which I did here. And the metric I used was the internal rate of return, which I'm happy to talk at length about with anybody after this. So if you run my base case through there, you wind up with a return of about 6.5%, which is starting to approach the return of the total stock market. That's pretty good, I would argue, because there's two components to the performance of an investment, right? There's return, and then there's risk. So what's the risk on a solar energy system? I would argue that it's fairly low. Their performance is typically under warranty. We don't know what's going to happen with electricity prices. I would argue they're unlikely to actually go negative, so you can make a conservative assumption about what they're going to do, which I did here. And it seems like a relatively low-risk investment. The primary risk is changes to the utility rate structure, which are always up in the air. This was also vividly illustrated in Nevada recently when the utilities reduced the reimbursement rate for solar systems dramatically, leading to basically an overnight collapse of the solar industry. They've recently rolled that back a little bit after a long political fight, but it is a real risk. So one of the things I did was say, what happens if the utility reimbursement rate gets cut by 25% tomorrow? And if you do that, you wind up with a return just a little bit under 4%. Significantly lower, still higher than a 20-year treasury. Still pretty good. The other thing, too, is that there's actually upside risk to solar. You know, what happens if prices go up faster than expected? So I did the same thing. I said, well, we're going to increase this 25% overnight, and now you get a return a little bit over 8%. So now it's pretty similar to the stock market. This assumes that this happens tomorrow. You know, as time goes on in the life of your investment, those bars are all going to start to level out. You know, if they make a change at year 24 into a 25-year investment, it's not going to have as big of an effect. So that seems like a reasonable bracket to me. Is solar a good investment? That really depends on you and your financial situation, but it's certainly in the range of something to think about. Another question is, you know, how much am I going to save on my bill every month? And related to that is, what's the payback? You know, when is this system going to pay for itself? This is a pretty straightforward calculation to do, honestly. I just put in this graph at the top to illustrate the point that solar systems produce a lot more energy during the summer than they do during the winter, about 6 times as much. So when I approach this, I just take the monthly average and use that to do this calculation. This hypothetical base case I did produced monthly savings of about $56, which gave it a payback of just under 13 years. And I think that's what you're going to find typically for these systems. It's somewhere in the range of 12 to 14, although the installers may want to weigh in on that. So pretty straightforward calculation there. One thing to note is if you do take a loan, depending on the way the loan is structured, your payment is probably going to be on the order of $100 to $140 a month. So you're not going to be able to take a loan and save enough money to make your loan payment. And I dug into that a little bit further, and prices are going to have to come down significantly before that's the case. Even if you got a 0% interest loan, this would still be, your loan payment would be higher than your savings. Another question that I thought was pretty interesting is, should you buy now or wait? And this is the same kind of chart that you'll see every time people talk about solar, which is this dramatic price decline over the last couple of years. We're talking on the order of about 70% price decline over 7 years. So, maybe it makes sense to just hang out and let this go on for a little bit longer before you go ahead and purchase a system. So there's a lot more assumptions that go into that, and you don't have to look at all of these. I'll just say there's a bunch and highlight that there's a couple that really drive what's going on. The first is the alternative rate of return, right? Like if you're going to hang on to your money and purchase a system in a couple of years, what are you going to do with that money in the interim? If you go and triple it playing poker, well, of course it makes sense to wait. But you're probably not going to do that, right? Yeah, right. It's a no-brainer. But standard personal finance advice is if you know you're going to need the money within a couple of years, you want to put it somewhere very safe, like a certificate of deposit, and those are returning very low amounts these days. The other thing to note is that the federal tax credit is going to start to step down in a couple of years and then go away. And finally, and probably the biggest point, is that while you're waiting for prices to go down, you're paying the full rate for that electricity. So if you put all that together, you'll find that the savings are not that dramatic. The case I used was assuming an 8% annual decrease in installed cost, which I think is a mid-range sort of aggressive rate for price declines. And even with that, you're looking at a difference of about $500 on a system that costs about $9,500 after the incentives. So to me, that's not a very compelling case to wait for prices to go down. Two more things to note about this since I first drafted the report is there's been a lot more talk about adding a tariff to imported solar modules, which is going to do something to the projected price declines. And also under the current tax bill being considered, the federal investment tax credit is currently slated to go away. So both of those add a lot more uncertainty. So even with fairly aggressive price declines, I think there's not that much of a case to wait. And when you throw the rest of those into the mix, that just makes it even stronger. Okay, so what about the value of your home? This turns out to be a very complicated question to answer. This paper from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, I think, is the best attempt I've seen to answer it. And what makes this complicated is you think about trying to figure this out from the data, right? But how can you tell what influenced the price that a home sold for? Because it all depends on what the market is willing to pay for it. And did the national market go up? Did your local market go up? Did your block, did somebody, improve their house across the street, right? Is it the solar panels on your roof or the granite countertops? Like, how do you tease all that out? And the answer is you get a huge data set, and then you feed it into a big econometric model that looks like this. And I gave this presentation internally at the credit union, and I put this up basically to say, yeah, it's complicated. And of course, people immediately put their hands up and started asking me questions about what the parameters were and how they calculated the beta and all that. So that's what everything is. There you go. But these guys did it. They took a huge data set and they ran it through that grinder and they got a result. So there's a lot going on up here. But I circled kind of the relevant part. And that blue bar is the observed price premium for homes with solar. And then those bars off to the right are a couple of different ways of trying to predict what the value is. The two takeaways from this, one is that there's a huge error bar on that observed price premium, a lot of variation. The other one is that the closest matching predictor was the replacement cost of the system, what it would cost to put on the same system that the house already had. You take those together, I read that as there's a ton of variation. It's really hard to say. A reasonable assumption would be that when you sell your home, you're going to recapture the replacement cost of the system. So when I did my financial return calculations, I just left this out. And a few other questions that I addressed in the report that I won't talk about here. Should you get a loan or should you pay cash? How big of a system should you get? What type of loan is best? All that is discussed there. The short answer is it depends, and it depends. But you should be able to read that report and get a little better sense of why that is and how it might affect your personal situation. So to put all this together, trying to address this question for yourself, the way I would approach it is the first thing I would do is think about what my questions really are. You know, how am I thinking about this? What's important to me? Am I viewing this as an investment? Do I want to know how much I'm going to save every month? Do I want to know what the payback is? Am I trying to decide if I should take a loan or pay cash? You know, really think about what the questions are going to be. The next one is to collect data. And there's only a couple pieces you really need. You need to know what your electric rate is. And there's a couple of subtleties to that I describe in there. You need to know the installed price, or at least be able to estimate it. And you need to know how much production you're going to get per kilowatt installed, right? It all depends on how much shade you get, the way your roof is oriented, the roof pitch. Definitely the best way to get a really good answer to that is to have an installer come out to your place. If you're just doing kind of a back-of-the-envelope calculation, there are very good online calculators. The one I use all the time is called PV Watts. It's by the National Renewable Energy Lab. And so you can either try to take some guesses at this and just sketch it out, or you can contact an installer and really get much tighter answers. And once you have all that, it's fairly easy to run through a calculator. Installers will typically provide answers to some of these metrics. PV Watts, again, will provide some of these answers as well. So if it does come time to get a loan, I want to mention a couple of products that are available. The first is the Montana DEQ Alternative Energy Revolving Loan Program. Ben Brower runs this program. He wanted to be here tonight. He wasn't able to be at the last minute. He's been a longtime friend of solar, a great guy. And this is a really good loan program. It's a loan up to 10 years, up to $40,000, very low interest rate of 3.25%. It is secured, which means that the DEQ will actually have a claim to your solar panels, and there's some paperwork you have to go through at the beginning in order to get that set up. But it's a great loan program, and you can certainly give Ben a call, and they also have information online. At the credit union, we've also developed two loan products. The first is the home energy loan, which is 15 years, $25,000. Interest rate is a little bit higher, right? And we're never going to be able to beat the DEQ interest rate, and that's fine. You know, we support anything that's going to get more solar projects done. The whole point of that program is to provide a below market rate interest rate. So how can we compete? My thinking was we're going to make this thing incredibly easy to use. You can apply for this loan online. You can give us a call. You're going to get pre-approved within 15 minutes. Once you decide to go ahead, we can help move the money around straight to the installer. And I've really done everything I could to make this a very streamlined, smooth process. So that's my goal with that one. We also have a home equity loan, which is a little bit longer term, a little bit higher dollar amount, slightly lower rates, that is secured with a lien on your home. The real benefit to this one is that you can deduct the interest on the loan from your taxes. I go over this in more detail in the report. If you're in the right kind of financial situation, that could actually substantially improve the performance of the system. So that'd be something to think about. A little more administrative overhead, since this is a secured loan. So these are things I would hope you would consider. And that's all I've got. So I'd be happy to take questions at the end of all this. I'll also be circulating, and you're always free to shoot me an email or a call at the credit union. I'll talk about solar anytime. Thanks.
Great, so we'll have all these guys come up and answer questions here in just a few minutes. Again, if anybody does need to leave, grab one of those little quarter sheets back there that give you the links, and all this information will be online, again, at the Climate Smart website, and then some links to some other places. So if you missed some of those gory details like the calculus, we'll make sure that is up there with this slideshow, in case you want to test the assumptions from Paul. Just wanted to mention a couple things really quick. One is that Ben Brower, who is this great solar advocate and works at DEQ, he was planning to come over here, and he runs the Renewable Energy Loan Fund, and it turns out they are staying up probably all night to work on a fiscal note, because it turns out that one of the legislators at the special session decided that anybody who has any money in the bank, why don't we sweep it and use it to pay down the gap in the amount of money that's taken in. So there's a budget shortfall, right? So this Nancy Ballin said, well, just scoop all that money up. And it's like, well, it's a revolving loan. Of course there's money in the bank for that. So it doesn't seem very smart to people like us who are solar advocates and renewable energy advocates. And I say that because people are working really hard in Helena right now to try to preserve some of the smart things we're doing for conservation, for renewable energy, for solar, for those things. So feel free to contact your legislator and tell them that some of these programs are really meant to last, and they're smart, and they're forward-thinking, and perhaps we need other ways to get the revenue. And I say that also because we're going to continue to need advocates for solar, for net metering, for all these things. I know a lot of people in this room have probably followed this and were around during the last legislative session, then when Andrew and a whole bunch of other folks were, sort of beating down the hatches and there every day trying to make sure that the laws that we have that allow net metering, that allow for these tax breaks and stuff are there into the future. So we need folks to be solar advocates to preserve those laws. And there's also some potential neat opportunities to pass some new rules, whether they're administrative or especially at the legislature, that it would allow us to really go further, to allow us to adopt the community solar, do some smart things that other states are doing that will really move renewable energy forward. But we need the right elected officials, and we need them advocating for those things. So it's going to be, continues to be a battle, but hopefully we can get on the smart side of this if we can get some of the right people around the state working towards it. So it's not just the solar panels. We also need you to be good advocates. And we'll follow up again with folks and just give you some opportunities to, be part of a listserv or something as we go forward. If you don't want to, that's fine. But if you don't want to wait till the next legislative session, feel free to write a letter to the editor right now and advocate for some of these things. We need all the voices we can get.
I just want to add quickly on the revolving loan fund, too. The source of the funds for that fund are air quality violation fines. And so it's a really elegant program in that it is tied to penalty fines that come in, and then that provided the base funding for the loan. And then obviously it operates with repayment of the loan. One of the pictures I showed you, and that my friend who was texting me so enthusiastically, he used the DEQ loan fund. So it's a great program, and I think it's worth knowing that where the source of the funds came from for it.
Great. And, we all really agree, and whether you've done the really detailed math or thought about this is a really great time to get solar because, again, we don't really know as much as those, in perpetuity, these, some of these, the tax credits are supposed to be there, but nothing's for sure in the particular climate that we live in right now. So, and my family was one of those. We got a small 2 kilowatts, it's just 9-panel systems in 2011, so a lot higher than right now. And I'm just happy that you guys can get a better deal than that. I would never regret it because we have now, for the last 5 years, we try really hard to zero out. And most years we do with just a 2 kilowatt system. The one year we didn't, it's because my in-laws parked their motorhome and turned the air conditioning on for like 3 weeks. And I was like, what happened? So we don't invite them. No, that's another story. But one of the things it does is it helps you really think about your energy use, and you can not only have solar and green energy, but then a lot of times people, again, everybody's different, but we'll start really looking at how they are using their energy and be smarter about their use and be more efficient and more creative and conserve. And that's also, it can be for like Brian and his friend, Matt, that can be a fun game to play, but it's pretty neat. So I don't mind that we paid a little bit extra. We helped drive that market, and I don't really know anybody that I've ever spoken to that have regretted getting a system. I think people put a lot of thought into it, and then they're pretty happy to have it. So anyway, with that, what questions? We have time for questions. Again, if you do have to leave, just make sure we've got your name if you want to follow up, and just maybe tell me your question, and then if it's directed towards someone, let me know that. Yeah. Oh, yeah, actually, sorry, I meant to do that. So we do have 3 installers here, and I'll just have them wave their hands, and you're welcome to follow up. So we've got Janelle with Jordan Solar, right here. And then we've got Dan and Becky with SBS Solar. They're over there. And then Mike Sudik, Mike with Big Sky Solar. So those are 3 companies that work in Missoula and have put up a lot of installations. Again, they were part of our Solarize. There are other companies in Missoula. Anybody else here that's a solar installer that we missed? Oh, Solar Plexus. Okay, great. Didn't see you come in there. So yeah, feel free to visit with those guys. If not tonight, there's a few cards and information back. You can give them all a call, or anyone. And some people do, actually have more than one installer come out and do a little price comparison. I don't know. We can speak to that too if you want. But did you have a question, Derek?
Yeah, I don't know precisely how net metering works, but do you know if Northwestern Energy allows it? Like, does the offset also apply to the gas portion of your Northwestern bill, or just the electric?
Just the electric. Yeah.
So if you have a lot of gas appliances in your house, then maybe it doesn't as much pencil out.
Yeah, and I'll grab the mic so I guess I can be on the record here. So the question was, how does the net metering apply to gas utility bills? And it doesn't, so it just applies to your electricity bill. But what we see a lot when you go solar is kind of what this phrase gets called the electrification of your home. So when you get a solar installation, when you start looking into energy efficiency measures, because you have this on-site production ability, you can start looking at things like an electric water heater in your home, which water heating uses a lot of your electricity or your energy use in your home. Things like just your general home heating and how that's powered if it's natural gas versus electricity. And so if you switch some of those things over to electricity and then start doing on-site production through a solar system or a small wind system, you can really get your electricity bills down and your electricity usage down as well.
Okay, great. I have 2 questions. One, what's the typical size of a solar or rooftop solar array? And then secondly, maintenance needs.
Size is probably, tell me if I'm wrong, like 4 to 8 kilowatt or kW systems. Is that about right? So mine with 9 panels is pretty small, or 2 to 8. It just depends on the size of your home, whether you have a dryer, whether you have 8 kids that are all like blow drying their hair or stuff like that.
Are you talking physical size?
Yeah, so how does that translate into the number of
Okay, good.
Yeah, so I think the easiest thing to do is back of the envelope, think of each panel, and I think we're going to post the presentation, right? So there's that one slide where it shows the physical dimensions of one panel, and you could assume one panel is, say 280 to 300 watts. And then, so if you think of a 5 kilowatt system, that should be easy math. That's how, Dan, Mike, help me. 16 or 18 panels, something like that? 16, thank you. I was a mechanical engineering major, but apparently I can't do math anymore. So, and there are the dimensions on the panel, I think, about 5 feet, 5 inches, call it 5.5 by 3 foot, 3 inches.
So it kind of varies by
How-
customized.
Yeah, and it's there's the size of your roof where you get the optimum installation, how much space you've got there, and you'll see all kinds of different installations around 2 rows. This is 2 rows, 5 each, but you'll see 3 rows. You'll see, maybe not equal numbers of panels in one row or another row or something like that.
Just a couple points I'll add to this real quick. One is that under net metering, you can't produce more than you consume in a year. So sizing the system so that you don't exceed your annual use is very important. And electricity use varies widely between homes, which is one reason it's really helpful to have an installer do an assessment for you to make sure you're okay on that. As far as maintenance is pretty low, right? People are often quite concerned about sweeping snow and things like that. The thing is, your production is already so much lower in the winter than the summer. It's not as big a deal as you would think. There are very few moving parts on these, right? They're mostly solid state. One thing you do want to keep in mind, probably the biggest potential costs for maintenance are having to remove the panels if you're going to have roof work done, and that can cost, I want to say, between $500 and $1,000. Correct me if I'm wrong on installers. So that's something to consider. And the other thing is there's a component of the system called the inverter, which converts the direct current the panels produce to the alternating current that powers your home. And if the inverter goes out, that can be a substantial cost as well. And certain kinds of inverters are less prone to doing that, and they also come with different warranties. So that's something else you want to keep in mind when you're talking with your installer.
Along those same lines, too, people often ask questions about hail, and I don't know what the specific sort of measure is, but we've had some wicked hailstorms, and I have yet to hear of a panel that's been damaged in any of those. So let's go you, and then you back. Sure.
Are you aware of added costs for installing a flat roof? Yeah.
In order to tilt it, like it's some framework. I would take that up with one of the installers at the end. My assumption would be that there are, I mean, it's certainly done, and it likely, I'm assuming, would be fairly minimal, but added costs associated with the framework to put them at the optimum angle on the roof. But it certainly can be done.
Is that true? A little bit extra there? Yep. Yeah.
Okay. In the back there.
So these panels on your roof provide shade, and presumably therefore it reduces the heat influx through your attic into the house during summer. Is that significant? Is that worth thinking about in terms of your calculation benefit?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's come up in some of our workshops, and I would ask Dan. Do you have a comment on that, or?
I don't know of any study that's really pointed that out, but yeah, it's obvious. And modules are set roughly 6 inches above the roof plane because you want airflow behind the modules because you want the module to run as cool as possible. And so you are stopping a lot of sunlight from hitting those dark angles.
Yeah, so I would say it depends, Paul. It depends. It's a possibility. Really depends on your specific situation. Mike, do you want to add to that?
These 10 to 15% savings on air conditioning costs.
10 to 15% savings on air conditioning costs. Okay. I'm sorry, you.
Efficiencies with building systems with new homes versus retro, because a lot of what we're talking about is either retroing or building into new homes. Are there added incentives? Are there other efficiencies with designing homes with the pitch, with the intent of building solar into them?
My understanding in my first response, and everybody was grabbing for the mic, so maybe we can share this answer. But I think the biggest one you'll see is, I think the biggest one you'll see is any potential for any roof remodeling that you'll need. I think that's one of the biggest ones. So for a new building, if it's being designed such that the support structures in the roof could be solar ready, then that's where a lot of the efficiencies you'll see versus an older home, which certainly exists in Montana. There may not be a ton of Missoula that require it, but if you need to add any additional support to the roof structure in order to support the panels themselves, then that's an efficiency you would save with new buildings. So
to follow-up question, so to what degree are we working with builders?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that has come up a lot in community discussions that I've been a part of. And in fact, that Soul Smart program I mentioned earlier, that's the exact kind of thing that we're working on. So we're working on, discussions with developers, with planners, like I said, zoning developers, city ordinances, and there are actually even certain aspects of that program that will try to work with city ordinances to incentivize solar-friendly design and solar-friendly build, such that structures are solar-ready when they're designing roofs. But not only that, but also a community aesthetic, which is one that a lot of people don't think of. For example, designing buildings such that the solar kind of fits into certain parts of the community. The architecture and kind of how it looks. So those discussions, I think, are happening, but they certainly need developing.
one thing that made me think of, so we live in the north side, and there were several customers in the north side when we did the Solarized program. And one of the things that came up is a lot of older structures over there, a lot of detached garages, and it's not uncommon to need to reinforce the truss work in some of those structures. And so if you're in an older structure and you're thinking about doing a retrofit, it's something to be careful about, working with your installer and with city permitting to make sure that that structure, that you're not going to get into a substantial bill or cost that you weren't expecting to reinforce the structure. It's an issue, I think, in our garage, for instance.
Two questions about the shared solar systems. One, if we are with a company that allows that, do we have to be in a certain proximity of the source? And also, does anyone know if Northwest Energy is talking about being a part of that?
Yeah, I have both those answers, yes. The first one is proximity to the source. Yeah, I could stand up, I guess. Proximity to the source. No, you don't have to be any particular distance from the source. The stipulation is you have to be a co-op member. So since co-ops have service territories, there is, in theory, a geographical kind of restriction on where you can be, but as long as you're a co-op member, you can buy into that shared solar system. And in fact, because it's an on-bill credit and the system isn't physically located on your home, if you're to move but stay within that co-op service territory, you can still take those panels with you to your new address. Now, if you move outside of their service territory, there are certain options, depending on the co-op, on transferring ownership between you and either a next customer or giving it back to the utility, whatever it is. But as long as you're a member customer, you can buy into those systems from wherever you are. Northwestern Energy currently does not have net metering, or I'm sorry, shared solar like we talked about. That has to do with the net metering laws and the way they're written. They currently do have a couple pilot projects that they're working on to try and kind of test out some of what they're talking about, testing out some of the virtual net metering, kind of the shared solar concept. The one most closely related to shared solar is down in Bozeman. They have a 385 kilowatt array, and they're monitoring the production of the array, and then separately signed up a number of customers to share their production data. And it's like a virtual net metering program. They're kind of lining the two up and saying, okay, how would this production match these people and their energy needs? So they can't do it yet. They're kind of doing these pilot projects to figure some of that out. They're doing another pilot project in Missoula right now, but it's not quite shared solar. And so we'll kind of see what the results of that data is, and we're hoping to make that public and see what they do with it.
Can you share information about the solar roof tiles that we're seeing loaded now?
Yeah, sure. So the solar roof tiles, we're seeing some of those start to pop up around the country. We haven't really seen those penetrate Montana too much yet. I think there's one company out of Bozeman that's kind of dabbling with solar rooftop or solar roof tiles, but it just hasn't really come to Montana. I think mostly because Montana's kind of a smaller market, and we're seeing a lot of the distribution of those things into the larger markets. I think those companies like Tesla are kind of trying to see how they do, and then continue to improve the technology. And then after that, we imagine they'll trickle into some of the smaller markets. But we really haven't seen much at all, I think, in Montana yet. I actually forget the comparison offhand. I'm going to look at Paul because he just did a whole study on everything.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll waffle a bit because I don't know the details. I will say that the current panels like these are incredibly inexpensive and very easy to install and maintain. If you think about the number of electrical connections involved here versus putting on, whatever, 1,500 roof tiles, this is just a very simple system. Not to say that the smart folks out there can't figure out how to do them, but my suspicion is that it's going to be very difficult to beat this technology for price and ease for quite a while.
Oh, thanks. Didn't hold the mic in a while.
So with net metering, the best you can do on any scale would be to zero out your own. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I also know some people who, they plan their system to be able to zero out. So maybe it wasn't like 70, maybe they tried to get to 95, and then they got more efficient, and they figure, I'm just putting clean energy on the line, and they're happy about it. So it just sort of depends on your values. There's no problem with actually putting a little more solar energy onto the line, it basically just goes to your next door neighbor. But it does cost you. So, that's just kind of how you think about it, how big a system.
Just two quick notes on that. One thing that's important, because I think it comes up a lot in the net metering discussions, is when we're talking about zeroing out, we're talking about zeroing out your electricity use, your electricity, you're paying for your volumetric electricity usage, right? But there's always going to be your monthly base charge. And that's really important to know, because that base charge is going to supporting transmission and distribution and other aspects of the grid. So there is a monthly charge that you will always pay, and so you'll never fully zero out your utility bill, but you can zero out your electricity production there. And then also
$5 a month right now, and if you've heard about some of the fights with the net metering, there have been efforts to, that needs to be $50 a month, which would then all of a sudden your system is completely changed. It's all of a sudden extremely expensive, or even more than that. So some of the battles are to keep that at a fair rate, that tie-in rate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the second thing I wanted to mention too, which is important with net metering, is there's actually a 12-month true-up cycle. So after, you can kind of build up credits. So if you, say, generate over, instead of just a daily cycle, say over a monthly cycle, you're generating more energy than you're using, so the utility would kind of owe you some credits, right? You can use those in the next month. Now that's really important, especially in Montana, because you can build up credits over the summer when we have long days, right, and a lot of sun, and use some of those credits over the winter. Especially in Missoula, we have lovely snowy but very cloudy winters, and so you lose a bit of production. So it's nice to have those credits that you built up. At the end of the 12-month period, if you have any excess credits, those get forfeited back to the utility, and annually, right? And you can pick your true update. There are a couple ones that you can pick throughout the year, so you can kind of determine that and work through that when you set up your net metering agreement. But it's important just to keep that in mind.
Can you talk about the math of, talk about being more energy efficient? I think I read where Paris is trying to ban internal combustion engines by 2025 or something. So you've got an excess of energy on your roof. What's the math on using it to power your solar car? If solar cars are going to become more common over the next...
Just electric cars, EV cars.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
EVs.
Yeah.
I haven't run those numbers, but I bet it's really good. Even purchasing electricity tends to be less expensive than purchasing petroleum. And if you're able to charge that off of your roof, I think you're going to do pretty well. Yeah, I think that's as far as I'll be able to go with it, though, not having crunched the numbers. I think a lot of us have a sense that the transition to electric vehicles is going to happen much more rapidly than many people anticipate. And I think that it's going to be a big part of the grid going into the future.
We're not required to put generated EV energy through the net. Right.
To put it back out to the grid?
You can use batteries.
You can put it in your own batteries if you want to, yeah. You could.
Feedback all that you need to Northwestern Energy to get to zero, and then any extra divert to another battery source. Is that?
Yes, but normally the opposite. So normally if you've got your electric vehicle at home and it's plugged in, your electricity is always going to be behind the meter and get used behind the meter first. So it's going to power either your electric vehicle, which is essentially a battery, or an actual battery wall if you have one of those. And then any excess from there is going to go back out to the grid. Yeah. But there's a lot of interesting stuff being done right now on electric vehicles and kind of using them as batteries. And yeah, we're hoping to get involved in some of those studies here shortly if we can.
I don't recall her name, and she probably wouldn't want me to mention it, but years ago, an aero tour that we did in Missoula, there was a woman, and we went to her home in sort of the southern part of Missoula, and she had a pretty significant installation and a Nissan Leaf, I believe, and it's exactly the situation that Andrew was describing. Her house, went to her house needs, and then she would plug her car in, and she used it on a fairly limited sort of scope given the range of the vehicle, and then anything excess from there went to Northwestern.
Oh, yeah, I missed you.
Is that self-assessment tool, is that a link on Climate Smart's website? Or it was in the diagram?
Yeah, we have that linked on we have a page, and just MissoulaClimate.org solar-ease, and then you can link to some of those. And again, give us a day or two, but we'll put this whole slideshow up there and any of these other links too.
If the federal income tax credit exceeds your federal tax bill, is there a way to spread that over a couple of years?
Give it to the banker.
Yeah, I spent some time looking into that. Both that and the Montana tax credit can be spread over at least several years. I want to say that it's 3 years for the Montana credit, and as I read the code and the people I consulted with, I want to say there was no restriction on how long you can carry forward the federal tax credit. That's a great question, though, right? Because to capture this 30%, you have to have a sufficient tax liability you can use that. So that is another thing to consider.
The state, you can get that money. So if your state taxes are zero, you get $1,000 at a household, unless they mess it up tomorrow, which is possible.
Yeah, the ITC carries over.
You guys have good questions. How about a couple more, and then maybe we can just keep answering them individually and meet the installers. But go ahead.
How does the credit compare to the charge? Are they the same?
I didn't follow that.
Oh.
So does that mean net metering credit is applied to whatever?
It's the same rate. It's at the retail rate, so it's 1-to-1. Yep. That is something that has been part of the debate in other states, and I would guess the PSC is looking at that as well. But right now, currently, it's 1-to-1. It's the retail rate. So maybe a good time. Last one.
So I grew up in Missoula. I used to be Montana Power, that became deregulated. Northwestern Energy is the servicer of the lines. Are there other power companies that I could pay my money to without getting this over but that are not Northwestern Energy? That are greener?
Yeah, so after the deregulation experiment, everything got re-regulated, and you are not able to choose your provider. There are some very limited exceptions for large commercial customers, but by and large, you got who you got.
So the idea is that this investor, it's a monopoly, and they're regulated by the PSC. Is supposed to be the Public Service Commission, benefiting the public, but we've got some issues with that model right now. In our state, yeah. So, so that's what we need to help fix over the next upcoming years, decades. Pardon? Yes, the Public Service Commission, there are 5 of them. They're elected regionally. This coming next election in 2018, our Missoula area's person is not up for re-election. It's Bob Lake. He lives down the Bitterroot. Not a very big friend of net metering. So that's kind of the struggle that we're in, but that's why some people are looking at, okay, well, maybe I'll build a bigger solar system, I'll get an electric vehicle, and I'll electrify everything, and I'll try to, focus as much as I can individually. But we do have limitations. Our state's better than some and worse than others that way, and the idea is to keep strengthening it over time. So I guess with that, those are really good questions. Hopefully we've made solar at least somewhat easier. Again, I do hope you can visit with some of the installers and ask them specific questions. You're welcome to come up. Let us know how it goes. We'd be really curious to see if this inspires folks to move forward with solar, and any other feedback you'd have about running these kinds of workshops. Happy to hear that too. Thanks, Paul, Brian, and Andrew, and all you guys for coming.